Good morning, everybody. This is a live emergency briefing as it looks like we have the potential for hail up to gorilla size tomorrow, especially across northern Texas, but also across northern Louisiana, southern Arkansas, and possibly into central Mississippi along that warm front. This is the new 12Z NAM guidance coming in, and I wanted to start this off with a surface-based CAPE because this is the first extreme CAPE day that we've really had so far this season, and really the first threat of monster hail to happen. And we've got a dry line that's going to materialize back here across North Texas. It is going to be a little bit behind that low-level jet axis. Most of the model guidance actually has the strongest 1 kilometer winds in between those two zones across the warm front, northern Louisiana into southern Arkansas, and then that axis shifts off to the east during the evening and the overnight hours into central Mississippi. And that's why the Storm Prediction Center does have those 10% tornado probabilities maximized a little bit further east after dark when that low-level jet axis has a chance to push off to the east and rapidly intensify. Back here along the dry line, the low-level winds are a lot weaker, but immense instability and plenty of bulk shear as well. Sorry, I extended. I'm doing a live weather briefing. Yep, no need for anything. Thank you. Oh no, you're good. Thank you so much. Never stop chasing. Thank you. Okay, so then we have this dry line back across northern Texas as well. This is a big time dry line that's going to be ejecting. There is a pretty strong cap across this air mass as well, but with just a little bit of enhanced convergence along that dry line across northern Texas, I do think there's going to be the development of supercell storms by late afternoon into the evening hours, and these hail producers could also threaten the DFW metroplex. I know that there is a lot of concern always about hail across such a populated area like DFW. A lot of home damage, a lot of vehicle problems, but these are going to be isolated supercells, so there is a very good chance that hail could easily miss the DFW metroplex as well. But we're going to break down the models here. One thing you do have in general is a large pool of big-time CAPE, dry air just at the mid-levels surging in here as well. You kind of do have a complex upper-level pattern, almost similar to this last system too. And also keep in mind that the NAM didn't handle yesterday's system very well. The HRRR nailed it with that weird stratiform precipitation out ahead of it, kind of a reduction of that buoyancy as well. Kind of had a weird evolution of that squall or that plume that came up from central Louisiana, eastern Texas, and lifted all the way north through the I-20 corridor into southern Arkansas. I thought that was a surge of moisture, some deeper moisture, and dew points to the south of it. Looking at the surface map, we're in the mid to upper 60s. And I thought those supercells coming out of East Texas to the west and southwest of Shreveport would move into that deeper moisture to the south of that squall. But that squall also reduced the surface temperatures a bit. And so even though we were on the only tornadic storms yesterday that produced a big time, produced a tornado and a TDS signature there to the south of Shreveport, they ran into that area of reduced buoyancy and then reinvigorated again to the east of Ruston. And I went to Chili's, and then that circulation passed about 2 miles to the east. We did record some infrasound data, but really no infrasound signals from either of those tornadoes. And I think that tornado cyclone that was approaching us to the west of Castro, Louisiana yesterday was just too small scale, kind of almost a quick QLCS tornado instead of that big mesocyclonic supercell that would have generated more infrasound, we believe. But we're still early on in this process. And tomorrow we're going to have another chase day. Big time dry lines setting up across North Texas. Supercell storms producing big hail across North Texas. Low level jet axis in between. So the best low level shear at about 6 to 7 p.m. is across this zone of the warm front, northern Louisiana into southern Arkansas. And then that axis shifts to the east across central Mississippi during the overnight hours, where there could be kind of a QLCS event, maybe some isolated supercells there. But it does lift the warm front up into northern Mississippi by tomorrow evening now. But this is just one model. This is the new 12Z NAM that's flooding in. We're going to take a look at the HRRR. We're going to take a look at the GFS, the European, even though the GFS and European models I don't use as much for these short range forecasts. I usually use those more for the medium and long range assessment of environments and shapes of the upper level storm systems, presence, evolution of the low level jet axes, and not as much for those convective parameters. And here is the upper level storm system that's leading to this event tomorrow. Oops. Whoops. Looks like I just lost that stream. We'll cycle back and start this thing over again. Having immense technical difficulties this morning so far. Stand by. We'll get this back up here in a sec. All right, we're back. All right, everybody, good morning. We are back for the second attempt of this live briefing. Just had some technical difficulties there. I was just trying to shift the slide and ended up hitting the stop streaming device. But this is what we're talking about, the threat of guerrilla hail tomorrow, late afternoon and evening, basically from North Texas and along this warm frontal zone, northern Louisiana, southern Arkansas, and central Mississippi during the evening hours. You've got a dry line that's forecast to set up across North Texas. Extreme instability in place. This is surface-based CAPE by the 12Z NAM. That's hot off the press here. And then you can see this massive blob of CAPE extending along that warm frontal zone off to the east as well. And this is a pretty complicated setup. It looks like hail is definitely a certainty tomorrow. But in terms of the tornado threat, it's a lot more complicated because of the unusual shape of this ejecting trough and its interaction with kind of a subtropical jet with almost some anticyclonic curvature upstream of it. You kind of get this weird configuration of the low-level jet axis shifting a little bit off to the east. It's kind of focused over northern Louisiana to southern Arkansas during the late afternoon and the evening hours. And then that low-level jet axis shifts to the east during the overnight hours. And that's why the Storm Prediction Center has a 10% tornado threat across portions of central Mississippi there. The new NAM showing that warm front lifting even further north into northern Mississippi. And back here in the North Texas, you've got a dry line with extreme buoyancy in place. It is going to be strongly capped through the afternoon and evening hours, but there should be enough convergence along this dry line to initiate large hail-producing supercell storms, and those could even impact the DFW area tomorrow. But definitely massive surface-based instability out here. The strongest low-level jet is going to be kind of in between those two target areas. Right now, that's where I'm located, near the Ruston area in northern Louisiana. And I'm going to decide whether to go west and work the dry line or work this warm frontal zone with a greater tornado potential. As many of you know, I do enjoy intercepting hail with the Dominator 4, which might bring me back a little bit further west toward that dry line structure back there. And then as those supercells evolve, maybe the low-level jet will increase a little bit, but I do think that this target area out here is going to be predominantly a massive hail threat out there with a relatively weaker low-level winds, about 1 kilometer above the ground. And I did mention that there is kind of an unusual shape to this upper level system, and this is how it looks right here. This is the NAM model. And thank you guys for joining me for this live briefing. Also, thanks for riding in the passenger seat yesterday during those intercepts down in Louisiana. I know we were on the only tornado producers there to the south of Shreveport. Definitely an interesting setup. I saw that squall coming up from east Texas and central Louisiana, lifted up to the I-20 corridor, looked at the surface map and noticed that there was an increase in dew points to the south of that squall. They went into the mid and upper 60s, but that squall also reduced surface temperatures as it lifted off to the north. and that kind of created a reduced buoyancy ahead of those tornado producers. So even though I was waiting there at that road closed sign in Castro, that storm complex basically shed that vortex, and it shot off to the northeast like that, away from my location. It's almost like I'm killing the tornadoes this year, which more than happy to do. But this is the upper level storm system, 500 millibars, and I mentioned that it's kind of a complex evolution. You kind of have this split flow pattern. You have this almost a subtropical connection, a reduced, a suppressed subtropical jet, as you often get with La Niñas, and not fully phasing of the two weaker jet streams. And then you get this little split flow regime. You get a vortex in that aspect, and then you also get this anticyclonically curved subtropical jet back to the west, and then you kind of have a cyclonically curved subtropical connection. But really the incomplete phasing of this vortex with the northern branch of that jet and the subtropical jet is what's creating this weird configuration to the Cape, with the Cape blob back here across North Texas, but a little bit removed from the low-level jet axis that's further east. That low-level jet is fueled by the cyclonic curvature of this southern branch of the jet. And that's why it's in between those two target areas. But then in the overnight hours, by about 3Z after dark, that low-level jet axis extends off to the east into central northern Mississippi, maybe southern Mississippi as well. And it looks like there is an enhanced threat of some tornado potential after dark tomorrow night as well, as that low-level jet potentially increases off to the east. So that's why I think there's going to be mainly a threat of hailers. This is closer to the core of the jet. That's why you have such extreme Cape values, because you have very cold air aloft further west near the core of that vortex, the core of the upper level trough. And that's why you get that Cape bomb there across North Texas, just a textbook setup for hail. And you still have relatively strong mid and upper level winds as well, 40 to 50 knots there over top of that dry line structure. And that's why supercells are going to be the likely mode, monster supercells producing big hail. But there is going to be a decent capping inversion as well, kind of behind this little jet streak. So there is a chance that the cap could hold through the afternoon and spare a lot of those locations of the big hail. Right now I'm in the Ruston area. This is at 0Z, this forecast here. But definitely a pretty complicated upper level pattern for this setup. And here's the forecast 850 jet by just the NAM. We're going to look at some of the other models as well. I'm not a big user of those ensembles. I just like to look at the one operational models and figure out the biases within those, learn the biases throughout the season, and then use that to my advantage for forecasting. But I still look at ensemble products as well, and we'll do that additionally. But this is the 850 axis ahead of that cyclonically curved mid and upper level flow. You can see 40 knot winds, 1 kilometer above the ground across northern Louisiana. Just hammering that warm frontal zone, causing it to even lift up near the Highway 82 corridor there into southern Arkansas. So this is where I think the greatest tornado potential is going to be, in that warm frontal zone to the east of Dallas. This is the back edge of that low-level jet axis. And as is often the case of these setups, these dry line setups that are located more toward the core of the upper level low, a lot of times the western edge of that low-level jet pushes just to the east of the main Cape axis and where the supercell storms fire. But there definitely is a chance that this could verify just a little bit further west, and you can squeeze out a 30-knot southwesterly low-level jet with those storms. And that, with a little bit of some back surface winds as well, you could get a mesoscale accident with any supercell storm like that. So there is an outside chance of even a tornado back with that mode across DFW. We'll break down the HRRR model, the RAP, the 3-kilometer NAM, also the GFS and the European model. But this is that main low-level jet axis, kind of in between the two zones. And this axis is also forecast to shift off to the east near the overnight hours into Mississippi. And that could definitely increase the nocturnal tornado threat there tomorrow evening. And here is the SPC outlook. Basically looks like a whale there, an orange whale. And you can see the dry line back here. This is more for a hail threat. We have more of a 5% tornado threat there. Probably could put that 10% tornado threat in this zone as well at around 6 or 7 p.m. The core of that low-level jet axis is a little bit further west at 6 or 7 p.m. And if any storms can develop along that warm frontal zone, initiated by the enhanced convergence of that low-level jet slamming into that warm frontal zone near that boundary, there could be a tornado threat there as well. It almost reminds me of that April 26, 2011 event where The best hodographs were located further east out here, but then you got those supercell storms that developed closer to DFW, and that one actually became the tornado producer there in Van Zandt County to the east of Canton. And then you've got this warm frontal zone as well. This is going to be more of the nocturnal event, but the Storm Prediction Center does have a 10% tornado risk there as well. Jackson up to the north through Greenville, up toward the Grenada area as well, up into Mississippi along that I-55 corridor. And that enhanced risk even extends into western Alabama for the very late night hours tomorrow night. So now let's take a look at the models in a bit greater detail. We'll look at the NIM, and then we'll look at the HRRR. Then we'll look at some of those ensembles as well. Add this window here. And as I mentioned, the subsonic data yesterday, that infrasound data, didn't capture much of an infrasound signal from either of those deployments. The one in the Chili's parking lot, as well as the deployment to the west of Castro there additionally. The one in the Chili's parking lot was a little bit ruined by the vehicle noise. I ended up leaving my vehicle running. Whenever I shut off my vehicle, I'm worried that it's not going to turn back on. And that's kind of an issue. So here is the NAM model. And we are going to have a pattern shift. So it looks like about 10 days of quiet, potentially to close out the middle part of April. And then I think we'll reinvigorate storm season toward the end of April into early May. We're going to have some ridging building in the western U.S. It's going to create a lot of cold air across the eastern U.S., central and eastern U.S. Excuse me. So here's the NAM at 0Z. And we step forward to 3Z, and we're going to watch that eastward evolution of the low-level jet. See it starting to move into Mississippi there as well, but that western axis of that stronger low-level jet at 3Z, which is 10 p.m., is basically right along the Texas-Louisiana border, and it extends into southern Arkansas. This environment here at 3Z would definitely be supportive of a tornado threat into southern Arkansas, also near that Louisiana-Arkansas border. Look at that extreme cape up there. Big, thick cape aloft. Elevated mix layer tomorrow that we didn't have yesterday. Quite a bit of curved low-level flow as well, a lot of directional shear. PDS tornado sounding hodograph there with that 1 kilometer wind of 40 knots. And definitely surface-based storms. Still an abundance of 3 kilometer cape even below that capping inversion. So this is definitely a robust tornado potential along that Louisiana-Arkansas border tomorrow, along that warm front, just a little bit to the west. Of that zone, but that's a beautiful hodograph there. Large curved hodograph, 1 kilometer wind, 40 knots. Plenty of 4, 5, and 6 kilometer winds in the mid-levels to evacuate those gorilla hailstones from the updraft. Elevated mix layer there, steepening these mid-level lapse rates. Look at the rate at which that red line decreases with height. And that lapse rate is caused by the drying here, this elevated mix layer. The green line is dew point, and you can see this little dry slot punching in there, acting to steepen those lapse rates in the mid-levels, right within that strong bulk shear zone there. A lot of cold air aloft at 500 on this sounding. We're almost at minus 20 at 500 there, and that's even near the Louisiana-Arkansas border. So, and by this time too, that low-level jet axis is veered out across northeastern Texas, so I don't expect a nocturnal enhancement of the tornado threat with those hail producers that could develop near the DFW area and move along northeastern Texas there. You can look at the low-level shear, storm relative helicity. We'll also push off to the east of that core of the low-level jet. There you can see it punching in toward the I-20 corridor, nosing into far southern Arkansas, and this is at 3Z. But you do have non-zero 0 to 1 kilometer helicity all the way back, even where those 1 kilometer winds are so veered, and that's because there is going to be some directional shear out there. But at around 10 p.m., banked up against the dry line, you do have the rapid onset there of a capping inversion, so you might get more of some decoupled, elevated supercells eventually, but you still do have even a smaller shaped hodograph, but you still do have that non-zero 0 to 1 kilometer shear in there. And that's why the Storm Prediction Center has that 5% tornado probabilities all the way back through the DFW Metroplex, in addition to that very large hail. But a massive hail impact looks to be on the way for DFW, northeastern Texas, with a higher tornado threat further east near the core of that low-level jet. Let's see, even as we go toward the midnight hours, let's see what happens to that low-level shear. It's probably going to increase even more as that low-level jet continues to ramp up. And you can see that strong 0 to 1 kilometer shear overspreading a large portion of central southern Mississippi near midnight. So the late night hours definitely looks like some increasing 0 to 1 kilometer shear, and even a tail end extending back into southeastern Texas along that low-level jet axis. But this is why there is that 10% tornado threat as for the overnight hours there across Mississippi. You even get some PDS tornado type soundings out there. You get these long, big-time hodographs further east. So for the chase tomorrow, it's whether you want to chase beautiful supercell structure but guerrilla hail into northeastern Texas, or hold off to the east and work that warm front for an enhanced tornado threat that really ramps up 6 or 7 p.m. and then it really ramps up near the late night hours across central and southern Mississippi. Looking at the 0 to 1 kilometer EHI, you can kind of see where that low-level shear overlaps best with the surface-based cape. And you can definitely see it here across northern Louisiana into central Mississippi, central and northern Mississippi there. Stout EHI. So this looks like a late-night tornado event, overnight tornado event that's really going to ramp up here across this warm sector. Let's just see, eyeballing quickly, see how the HRRR is going, see if it's going along with it here. And it does appear to be in line with the NAM in terms of rough overlap of the 0 to 1 kilometer shear. It does have some greater low-level shear along with that cape across East Texas, even further west, and you can see that warm front surging to the north through the Mississippi River Valley into northern Mississippi. So there is even a tornado threat up there as well. That's at 6Z, however. So we'll go back to 0Z and see what that 0 to 1 kilometer EHI looks like. And yep, at 0Z2, it does show that most favorable overlap between the instability and low-level shear over the Arclitex. But that monster cape out along the dry line is really contributing to these positive values in EHI. If you click on there, you're going to see some relatively small hodograph shape, but extreme cape. Look at that cape. This is the first time all year that we've seen monster cape like that. And that's why there's going to be big-time tornado threat, a big-time hail threat back there. Dew points into the upper 60s, temperatures into the mid-80s. And there is quite a bit of directional shear as well on that dry line. South-southeasterly winds flipping around 1 kilometer up. You get these west-southwesterly 25-knot winds. And that's what's contributing to this hodograph shape, even though it's a small size to the hodograph. With those wind magnitudes not really getting too much above 25 to 30 knots, you still have this stronger bulk shear, even becoming west-northwesterly back there over the dry line. Definitely going to be some big hail producers, slow-moving storms too, about 15 to 20 knots out there, potentially evolving over that DFW Metroplex and even along the dry line, maybe a bit further south. But out here in the Arclitex by 6 or 7 p.m., more favorable hodograph shape. You can see out here at the 1 kilometer winds, more southerly at about 30 knots, flipping around above there by 700 to 45 knots, creating a more favorable hodograph. It's just whether this cap right here is going to prevent storms from developing that far east along the warm front. I suspect they will. That low-level jet developing and that convergence slamming up against that warm front. But boy, the warm front position. by 1Z, it does look like you get a bit of an increase in the low-level shear as well along that dry line. So it's possible that those hailers, as they're evolving back toward DFW, could have a bit of a low-level jet increase as well, further west near the core of that jet. Right. Boy, the HRRR even as far as southeastern Oklahoma in play, southwestern Arkansas, with that warm front lifting to the north, hanging down into southern Mississippi at 0Z. So the threat into Mississippi is not going to ramp up until the late night hours down there. And there is going to be a pretty substantial threat down there as well. Boy, look at that, back along that dry line. Let's see that. The HRRR, different than the NAM, brings that western edge, the western gradient of the low-level jet a bit further west. Look at that. You do have a little bit of an enhancement of that low-level jet even back into North Texas. But the core of the main axis of the low-level jet starts to push east by this time, starting to move into Mississippi. So by about 4 to 5Z, that's when the threat's really going to ramp up into Mississippi as well with this system. See if the 3-kilometer NAM backs that western gradient of the low-level jet up into the DFW area. And the 3-kilometer NAM is more in line with the regular NAM, pushing that low-level jet axis further east. Kind of Tyler Longview areas is where that back edge is by 2Z here. But then after 3Z is when that low-level jet axis begins to move into central Mississippi, ramping up the threat out there as well. Look at that thing. And I do think the threat could be a little bit further north into central Mississippi, even northern Mississippi late night. And this is the cold air coming in behind it, ushering in our pattern shift. And then that threat of severe weather shifts off to the east. Augusta National could be impacted by some severe weather out in this area Saturday afternoon. Maybe even my mom's place up in upstate South Carolina, but there'll probably be some stable air dominating out there. So definitely be something to watch as well further east. I'll try to chase both of these systems if I can. Not much in the way of instability for that system. We'll see though. There's a slight risk out there in the southeast. So let's now look at the HRRR convection. We'll go straight into it, might as well. You can see it could probably even be a later show. Look at the you just don't really get that low-level shear back against the dry line by 21Z. It doesn't really develop until late. Wouldn't be surprised if the HRRR even doesn't convect it at all. I guess that's a possibility. Looks like the HRRR tries to fire a storm there in south central Oklahoma. There is going to be some mixing, it appears. It's very possible that a strong capping inversion could mitigate the severe weather threat across DFW a bit. Look at that dry line by 0Z, basically right through DFW. Deeper dew points off to the east across the Arkansas, Louisiana area. And then finally, you start to get initiation by 2Z about 9 p.m. down here, a little closer to the Architects. And you start to get by 3Z the development of these nighttime supercell storms down near Jackson. This is the development of that nighttime mode. Big monster MCS extending down into northeastern Texas. So if you go by the HRRR, it's suggesting that the cap's going to hold along the dry line across DFW, which would reduce the threat of big hail out there. And then at about 4Z, 3 to 4Z, 10, 11 o'clock, you start to get the development of these renegades down into central southern Mississippi there. That's with that warm front lifting off to the north. Nice near 70 dew points out there. Better moisture surge coming out of southeastern Louisiana ahead of this system. And that MCS evolving right here. It seems like that enhanced risk just kind of outlines where the greatest cape is located. But boy, a deeper look, and it's very possible that maybe that dry line won't convect. But the HRRR has been underdoing a little bit of that. I remember the dry line circulation up there in Kansas completely went nuts a couple days ago. This is at 6Z near midnight. The MCS starts to move into northwestern Mississippi. We'll have a tornado threat up there as well. Some circulations embedded within this line tomorrow night, late night tomorrow night. Big surging, arcing event. Straight line wind surging south through southern Arkansas into northern Louisiana. But you've got these renegades across southern Mississippi. So clearly that's where the 10% outlines, where those renegades are forecast to develop during the late night central southern Mississippi. But these are going to be a problem here across northern Mississippi as well, late night, midnight to 1 a.m. out there with those jobs. The shifting east of that low-level jet. And the HRRR often overdoes mixing with these types of setups, at least it used to. Everything changes so fast these days that it can be difficult to keep track of the biases out here. But you do have 3,000 plus cape along this dry line into Dallas. And this is at 21Z. No cap. No cap at all. 87 over 64, and you're probably going to notch those dew points up a little bit. Not a ton of directional shear along the dry line. That's why the 0 to 1 kilometer shear is so reduced. Monster cape aloft, though. So I think that dry line is going to convect near Dallas tomorrow. You're going to have some convergence out there. Looks like the presence of no cape by about 21Z. Probably get the initiation of those storms near peak heating. And then could always intercept those around 4 or 5 p.m. and then blast off to the east and then try to get that nocturnal mode as well. So try to chase both setups as I'm heading back to the east, heading back toward home for temporary. I got my apartment in Colorado as well, if it's still there. At 23Z through DFW, let's take a look at. There's just no cap, so I think that there's going to be storms out there. Even get a little bit of backing of those surface winds east of the dry line circulation. Could locally enhance that severe weather. But this monster cape is it. Big hail out there. It's going to be the main story across DFW. Portions of northeastern Texas and along this warm frontal zone. Maybe some later evening, 6, 7, 8 p.m. type of an event. But it's difficult for storms just to erupt in a clean warm sector like this. Even with that cyclonically curved mid and upper level flow, it really helps to have surface convergence as well. And that's what this dry line structure provides across northeastern Texas. Even some cape as well into Oklahoma, showing that storm initiating along the cold front into the Oklahoma City area. Could be a little hailer up there into Oklahoma City. And that front sags to the south by 0Z. Still monster cape in place as those dew points slosh upward a little bit. And you start to get just a little bit of a curvature to that little mini hodograph there in the DFW area to the east of that dry line circulation. Could be very interesting as well. So when we get this down period for 10 to 14 days here to in the middle to later portion of April, I'm going to focus hard on my Storm Chase EDU classes. Those are provided exclusively for Facebook supporters. And that's my plan, is to get back into those classes, start eating fiber again, recharge my adrenal glands, focus on wellness, continue to put this long hauler stuff behind me too. I get my vaccine next week, the Johnson & Johnson one, I think. Finally got signed up. We got 66 dew points here, lifting north just ahead of this dry line, a very sharp dry line. But you don't get those teens until you get back into the panhandle, way to the west. But sufficient to qualify as a dry line, certainly, even though the dew points drop into the 40s behind it. Man, it's freezing in here, that AC. What the hell? There also is a marginal risk today, too, in a big 2% area that stretches from the Gulf Coast region all the way up to Michigan, back to my home state. Should probably take a look at this as well. And this 2% just kind of has this marginal moisture going all the way up to Michigan. But anytime you get 50s dew points in Michigan this time of year, all right, it could cause problems. But some very marginal moisture. You can see the deeper moisture hanging down into the Gulf of Mexico. That's about to fuel tomorrow's event. You got a dew point in the 30s there in Dallas. Little pseudo warm front that's going to lift back to the north, but that deeper moisture then floods back in tonight. There's our closed low, that bowling ball of a system still there. And you do have some cyclonic curvature to the east of it, over top those 50s dew points, all the way down. So that's why you have such a large 2% area until you get down into a little less cyclonic curvature down here, but you have a bit of a jet streak to the south of this deal. Weird south-southeasterly mid-level flow up there into Michigan. Man, things are weird just across the board. Weather-wise, everything is weird. Put on your seatbelts. This is the EHI. Looks like the EHI in general is maximized over central and eastern Tennessee and in northern Georgia. Look at some forecast soundings there near the Nashville area by about 4 p.m. No cap. You do have some non-zero cape all the way up. Weird flow with these west-southwesterly surface winds, but still contributing to some decent bulk shear with a 50 knot mid and upper level flow, about 35 knots at 500. Some dry air on the south edge of that closed low in general, with all those westerlies streaming across. Decent cape, but the hodograph looks like trash. Kind of a straight line hodograph, at least in terms of the tornadoes, but could be some hail. Maybe a mesoscale accident with this, especially if you could back some of these surface winds somehow, but low end severe day out here. Just clicking the bright colors. And when you look at that, you can get a little mesoscale terrain backing somehow of that, those southerly winds, and you can squeeze out a decent hodograph across northern Georgia with a 68 over 60 type surface temperature dew point spread. No cap. Cape all the way up. So there does appear to be a non-zero tornado threat, maybe Chattanooga area down into northern Georgia ahead of those storms. Michigan, good heavens. Just don't know. There is some decent directional shear at the low levels, pumping this hodograph off into this northwestern quadrant. A lot of easterly flow all the way up to the mid and upper levels of the environment, but you can squeeze out some kind of a pseudo supercell structure within this. This almost looks like more of a tropical storm, like the east or northeast quadrant of a tropical cyclone. Such a closed low, generating a very odd hodograph there. Who knows if that'll happen? Look at this cape. Low tropopause up there, but you got a little bit of an elevated mix layer too coming in the mid levels of the atmosphere. Decent directional shear even though you've got these southeasterly winds, south-southeasterly winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere. But there is non-zero storm relative felicity there with that hodograph. In fact, a buck 64 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative felicity with every wind vector focused here on this quadrant of the hodo. What an interesting setup. And this is at 4 p.m. Yeah, and kind of see a okay environment here, even over southeastern Tennessee. I should pull up radar. Just got a text message. There's even a little tornado warning with this mini supercell structure there. Little low-level jet pop over eastern Tennessee, northeastern Alabama, 44 knots out there. Anywhere along this large area all day today, from now until this afternoon, you could get a noodle out there, a little isolated noodle, maybe a mesoscale accident that could happen. Look at these storms developing into central Indiana. I mentioned that in a tweet the other day. Mesoscale accidents often happen up in this zone in the Corn Belt. They often happen in Indiana. And then you also get more mesoscale action probably around these lake breeze fronts with the very cold early season temperatures of Lake Michigan. But anywhere along this arc, eastern Tennessee, even the Nashville area, up through central Kentucky, up into central Indiana, little supercells, little hail producers, and very marginally sufficient hodographs for tornado potential out there. This is at 17Z, so getting close to the midday hour. Dang, look at that hodograph. It's actually a pretty favorable hodograph right there. Definitely something to watch. Good heavens me. No cap, 68 over 60, so no cap through the whole entire day out there. Little beans, little popcorn beans, supercells, little kidney beans out there. All the way up Indianapolis area. Keep an eye on these Nashville area, south central Kentucky, down into northwestern Georgia. It's by 19Z, kind of get an evolution of these embedded supercell structures down into northern Georgia. Eastern Tennessee and no cap, 73 over 55. And not a bad hodograph shape for these little small storms. When you get small storms like this, a smaller hodograph shape can still be sufficient to generate a tornado or two. And look at that. Nice shape to that hodograph as well. Get kind of an arc too, northern Indiana to southwestern lower Michigan. You get a weird little supercell structure there. Trying to ride that little lake breeze front. It's probably going to be a weird little mesoscale feature there. So you Michiganders may want to get near Allegan County down there, southwestern Michigan, and work this arc that pumps into the southwestern corner of Michigan there. Dew points in the 50s streaming out ahead of that little arc as well. And then you get into the dry air there to the south of the boundary into Indianapolis by late in the afternoon. But there's that moisture axis going all the way up to southwestern lower just for fun. Let's look at a hodograph out there. And you do have this little hodograph shape, interestingly, out there. So southwestern Michigan, you could get some little supercell structures. Tell you what. Let me pull up the radar too, start looking at these things since it already is late morning. It's already 11 o'clock out there, out east. Pull up radar here. When I do these briefings now, sometimes I just roll out of bed, fire up the live, and just kind of look at it in real time with you guys, figuring things out as we go. Come on. 3. There it is. Pulling up radar. It looks like there's a problem. What's that? Okay, pulling up some radar here for you. Showing these little mini storms that are already starting to evolve into northeastern Alabama through central Tennessee. Little miniature supercell structures. Look at this little thing here. You really got to squint to look at it. But this is a little miniature supercell structure here in far northeastern Alabama. You can see a little hook-like appendage here, pulling in a little bit of inflow on the southeastern side. Weird little stratiform precip here that could be producing a little differential heating boundary to set the stage for a mesoscale accident for this thing. See if it has a little tiny couplet in there. But a tiny hodograph is sufficient for a tiny storm to get its act together. Keep that in mind. This is just to the southeast of New Market, Alabama here, northeastern Alabama. There is a little, tiny little mesocyclone you can see there. Far out. Look at that little thing. Hook-like appendage on the south side, and you're probably going to see a bunch of these today. These little miniature supercell storms. Got a couple other ones into south central Tennessee, but have less access to clean inflow. This one's kind of got all kinds of junk to it southeast, so it's probably not going to do anything. Maybe this one could mature just a little bit to the northeast of Huntland. Well, this storm could produce a little noodle up there just to the east of New Market. Beautiful supercell structure happening, low topped. But there's little mini hodographs. Look at it. It is a little mini supercell structure for sure, just to the east of New Market. Wouldn't be surprised if that thing even produces. Well, that's what's going to happen a lot through the day today across central and eastern Tennessee as this thing evolves. There's going to be more of these developing in this long warm sector that goes all the way up through central Indiana, eventually up into southwestern Michigan, where there could be a couple supercell structures coming in there as well. Probably some warm front, pseudo warm front lifting north here maybe. And we should see in a couple hours start to see some a development of storms out in this area and across central Indiana as well. And look at the surface map too, and yep. Confirmed. Here is that surface map. And it looks like that little storm in northeastern Alabama might be flirting with a bit of a mesoscale accident up there. You got these south-southwest winds to the south of it. Looks like you have more south and south-southeasterly winds just to the east of it. Chattanooga 65 over 62, but then it destabilizes to the southwest of that. So the storms can initiate within this boundary and then interact with that little boundary of the south-southeasterly winds, kind of a pseudo warm front type of a feature there. There is a chance that they could squeeze out a little tornado potential. And that boundary is just to the west of the Nashville area, but it's about to push through, and then the dew points will drop into the mid-50s there. So then the threat's going to decrease and just kind of focus across eastern Tennessee, southern Kentucky there, and then eventually further north will destabilize as well. South-southeasterly winds all the way up. But look at it, it's pretty warm in Michigan. 70s this morning in Grand Rapids. And then you get this band of stratiform precipitation, and then you should get some destabilization to the south of it. But mid-50s dew points in the southwestern lower through central. Then you get a little 60s dew points, and look at that, 70 over 66 in that northeastern corner of Alabama. And that's why we got this little miniature supercell that we're tracking. Nice curvature on that forward flank gust front too, so I wouldn't be surprised if a tornado warning is issued for this thing. You got nice curvature there into this storm. This thing is legit, pulling in these southeasterlies here. Hook-like appendage on the southwest side. It's peeling off a left split as well. Look at this left split lifting off to the north. Wow. Little mesocyclone here too. An incredibly strong rotation, but I bet it's a beautiful looking structure. Well, I'm going to keep monitoring these, and I'll go live throughout the day, just watching these little beans off to the east, as I'm going to decide to position either toward the DFW area or work the warm front, or both. Probably work the dry line supercells tomorrow, late afternoon into evening, work that, and then head off to the east and work the nocturnal threat along the warm front eventually into Mississippi. So thank you everybody for joining my weather report this morning. I'm going to keep going live doing radar breakdowns as these little miniature supercells evolve from northeastern Alabama all the way up eventually into southwestern lower Michigan. Never stop chasing.